morning. My name is Gary Kibel, and as you heard, I'm a partner with a law firm of Davis & Gilbert in New York. I practice in the area of advertising, marketing, and communications law. Our law firm does a tremendous amount of work in this area, and today's topic, exit strategies for interactive companies. We do a lot of work in the M&A space for advertising and interactive companies, whether it's some of the largest in the world, or then very small companies of 2 or 3 people. I've been involved with Affiliate Summit for a very long time, going back to when Affiliate Summit was 200 people on a boat. So I've been involved in this industry really since the outset. So obviously people are here because they heard the title, Exit Strategies. You're thinking, all right, I'm in this business, I want to make money, what's in it for me? You want to find out how I'm going to monetize what I'm building. So this session is designed to go over some of the key topics and give you some issues to think about as you think long-term about that exit strategy. So I hope to give you some very practical advice. I think some good advice is, if you want to build a company, you can then monetize and sell for good value. I think one good thing is, maybe the first step, make your service as popular as Facebook. Now, we'll give you some more specific things you can get into. So, what am I going to talk about today? So I'm going to talk about concerns from a seller. And when I say seller, I don't mean you're necessarily always selling the company. You're the company looking to make a transaction and you bring in investors. We'll talk about concerns from the buyer's perspective also. And then, an exit strategy is not always the company is sold. There are many other things when I think of an exit strategy, and there are many interim steps to get to that ultimate goal that might be the sale of the company. So we'll talk about a lot of those interim steps that you do in the middle. So we'll talk about protecting and exploiting your intellectual property, and then talk about equity compensation for personnel, which is important before and then, of course, when a transaction ultimately happens. Then we'll talk about some day-to-day things, vendor and client contracts, which are really critical. Things that can come back to bite you later on when you're trying to work out a deal and realize you signed away some important rights. We'll talk about internal controls to make sure that you have the company buttoned down. And then you can't talk about the interactive industry without talking about privacy, because that can undo almost any venture. And I'm going to save plenty of time at the end so you can ask questions. Take advantage of the fact that you've got a New York attorney for an hour free, so you can ask all the questions you'd like to answer. All right, exit strategies. What is our exit strategy? So when you're a seller, you may think, why am I selling? Why am I even thinking about a transaction? Why don't I just keep on doing what I'm doing today? There may not be a need to upset the boat. Things are going well. We have customers. We have revenues. We're growing. I can pay my salary. Why do I need to think about that? Well, there are a lot of things that might go into starting to think about why you need to do something differently. One issue is growth. You may be looking at your company and thinking, we can't grow at the speed that we want to, or our growth has become stunted. We need to find a way to accelerate growth. Everyone else is growing quickly, and we're not going anywhere fast enough. So you might think that we need to combine with somebody else. In some of those transactions, you're not necessarily selling your company, you may be merging with another company. Maybe someone else who has services or products that can complement your own. Maybe you've been trying to diversify and get into a particular space, and it hasn't been working. And then you find someone else who's already there, already doing it right, and you can do a merger. So it may not be a purchase and a sale, maybe a merger of equals. There are lots of different combinations you can come up with. Another important thing is career goals. If you are senior management of a company or owner of a company, you might think, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Where do I want to be 10 years from now? Do I want to be running this company as it is now? Do I want to be, a bigger fish in a smaller pond, or a smaller fish in a bigger pond? I think I'm going to George Bush the expressions if I get them all mixed up. But you want to think about, where do I see myself? It may be your career goal to be part of a larger organization, or it may be your career goal to remain the CEO of an organization. So those are some thoughts you think about also. Then one of the most obvious ones is cash out. I've built this company. It's done a great job. I think it's got some real value now. It's got some worth. I'm ready to take some money out, or at least take some money off the table. Sometimes at necessity. You may be in a company that is maybe not doing too well, and maybe distressed, and maybe has some good products, some good services, some good clients, but it's just not working properly. I mean, I've been in transactions where, of course, there are the transactions that are the $100 million transactions. I've seen transactions that were basically zero. It was really zero purchase price. It was just a company that was in trouble but had some value. Somebody wanted to come in and buy it, keep the management on, keep most of the employees on, keep it going, but the company was just out of cash and really couldn't survive without a transaction, so the purchase price was zero. Another interesting issue is estate planning. If you have children, you get older, you may be looking at the company as an asset, and you want to pass it on to the next generation, either to have them be management in the next generation, or because you want to give your assets to them, and there may be tax benefits from going through a transaction before you pass this on to the next generation. These were 5 reasons to sell. There could be 50 reasons to sell. There's plenty of reasons. You all have your unique reasons. Then, as I said, it's not always a sale. It might be, when do I take on an investor? When is the right time? And that's sometimes hard to figure out what's the right time for an investor. One obvious thing is that the earlier you take on an investor, the more they're going to want in return. Now, going back to my joke earlier about Facebook, if an investor came to Facebook right now, Facebook's calling the shots. They're not going to be pushed around and give up a big chunk of the business for a little bit of money. But if you're in a startup situation and you're desperate for capital, you may be willing to give up a big chunk of your company to an early investor. So while this may not be the case for everyone, the longer you can hold out from bringing in an investor, sometimes the better, because you want to have a little bit more leverage. You want to show that you've got a real product, you've got a real revenue model going, and that you've got a little bit of leverage in the negotiation. If you are desperate, then you're going to be giving up a lot. And as the conversations go on with your investors, they may notice you're desperate, and they may ask for more as it goes on before you ultimately put pen to paper. All right, there's a lot of stuff you need to do as a seller. And we're going to talk about this throughout the presentation, about preparation, what goes on in the interim. It's not that you just put your head down, you're running your business, and then one day you come up for air and say, all right, I'm ready to sell. It's a lot of stuff that goes on during the interim, and because you want to avoid getting to that table with an investor when they open up and look at the books and say, this is not as pretty as what I thought it was going to be, and I actually don't want to take this on. So one of the very important things is the structure of your company. Now, I put up there S Corp, C Corp, LLC, the most common structures for a company. This is something that can be changed later on, but it's something you want to think about at the outset. An S Corp, for those of you not familiar, is a corporation, an Inc. that you've incorporated, but you've chosen to make an election for tax purposes that it'll be taxed as a partnership, which means the entity, the company, is not going to pay taxes themselves. It's all going to flow through to the owners, and the owners will just combine it with their own income tax returns. A C Corp, like most publicly traded companies, again, it's an Inc., a separately incorporated company, but it itself pays taxes. Now, if you're a small company and you're a startup company, that's not such a great thing. If you're a small company of 5 people, you don't want the entity to pay taxes. Then you pay yourself a salary, and you pay taxes, income taxes on that salary as well. That's double taxation. The big thing for a startup company, for a small company, is avoiding that double taxation. Now, an S Corp has some inherent limitations, which make it not so favorable. Firstly, there's a limit on the number of shareholders you can have. You cannot have multiple classes of stock. So if you had investors that wanted to have, Series A and you be Series B, you can't do that. So there's an LLC, which is a great structure. It's only been around for about less than 20 years in some states, and it's very flexible, and it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It's pass-through taxation, so there's no tax at the entity level, but you don't have all the limitations with an S Corp. You can set up any structure you want, and you can have multiple classes, and you can have different types of investors. It's very, very flexible. The reason you think about this now is that you may have an investor who comes to the table and says, for whatever reason, I can't invest in an S Corp because there are limitations, so I need you to convert. And if you were already an LLC, it might be a little bit beneficial to you. But to smaller companies, the advice is stay away from being a C Corp early on. There's no point of doing that. You may have an investor that requires that of you later on, and you'll deal with that when that time comes. But early on, no point in being a C Corp. Then there's something that we do in our firm a lot of times with some of our clients called sort of a legal audit. If you're going through a transaction and your company's going to be bought or there's an investor coming in, they're going to go through a due diligence process. They're going to look at your corporate books. They're going to look at your contracts. They're going to look at what's in place and decide, is this a company that I want to work with? And they want to uncover any problems and identify problems. So what I often say to clients is, if you're thinking that you might have a transaction in your future, we should just do an internal due diligence review on our own. That way we can uncover any surprises. And what we do sometimes as counselors to our clients is we almost act as an investor. And we will ask our client, give us the following information. Let's go through these books and records and see what you have. And let's try to identify any problems in advance so we can fix them. So then when the real investor comes along, the real acquirer comes along, we're prepared and ready for that. Some of the best transactions I've seen with companies are companies who've gone through a failed acquisition and learned a lot in that process, and then went through a second attempt at an acquisition, and then really got it right. Now, of course, you need to engage advisors. I'll pitch the legal industry. You obviously need lawyers. You need financial advisors, too. There are lots of different types of financial advisors. There are those that can help you value the company, because that's a big question. What is my company worth? How do I figure out what's a proper price? And there are models, and there are different models in different industries. There are models in the advertising industry about what's a proper valuation. But there are lots of different advisors out there, and you'll often find brokers who will help line you up with investors or someone who might want to acquire your company. Some things to be careful about. Obviously, be careful about exclusivity. They may say, we want to be your exclusive advisors for all transactions for the next 5 years, and we get 10% of any deal that comes down the pipe. Obviously, you want to be concerned about the length of any type of relationship with an advisor such as that. I can see them wanting exclusivity. They don't want to be out there pounding the pavement for you and then find out you've engaged 2 other brokers and they're competing against them, and maybe they've set the table properly and someone else comes in and gets the payday. So there's a lot of negotiation with brokers. I think the best relationships are ones that are very short in a period of time. Maybe you're saying, I will work with you for 6 months, and let's see what you can come up with in that 6-month period. And there may be things you want to carve out. You may have some pre-existing relationships with folks. There may be caps and ceilings on the compensation the broker is going to get based on the type of deal they get for you. A lot of brokers want a percentage, but certainly you may want to cap it. You don't want to give them a huge percentage when the numbers go really high. And then, again, preparation, we'll talk more internally. It's the day-to-day. The way you run your business is incredibly important. You need to think about how is this going to look to an outside party if they come in and look at our books and records and we have to open up everything to them. Okay, so now let's go to the other side of the table. So now you're a buyer. And it doesn't matter the size of the company, you can be a buyer. I mean, I have seen companies we talked about earlier about growth. A lot of times you may have a small company that says, I can really accelerate my growth if I buy somebody else, and then we'll really get moving. So you don't have to be a huge company to be a buyer. You can be a very small company. So what are some of the buyer's concerns? Well, what are you buying? Well, the number one thing, at least in the service industry and in the marketing industry, I always say is people. You are buying people. I sometimes tell clients, your most valuable assets ride the elevator every day. It's people, skills, knowledge, relationships. Those are some of the most valuable assets. After that, of course, are client relationships. When you're buying someone in this industry, you want to see their client portfolio. If they're working for the same clients you're working for, there's really no value in buying them. You already have that client relationship. Maybe they have some great people. Maybe they have a better relationship with that client. But if there's overlap, that may change the value of the deal. Now, you may be looking at someone who has fantastic technology or intellectual property. Maybe you have some internal systems that you license from a third party to run your company. It may be that the other party that you're thinking of buying has their own proprietary system. So you look at it and say, wow, they have a proprietary system which is better than what we use, and it wouldn't cost anything once we buy them, because now we don't have to pay license fees. That's a big thing sometimes when you look at a deal and realize where you can eliminate costs. So if someone has proprietary technology, that can be fantastic. And another big thing is eliminating the competition. You know, it may be that I want to buy another company, and it's not because I need their revenues. It's not because they're going to help me grow. You know, I don't even like their people. I don't want them working here. What I want to do is get them out in the marketplace. That way I can dominate, because we're butting heads with each other all the time, every time we go after clients. That's a very real reason sometimes. I've seen quite often, sometimes you'll see lawsuit between competitors over, you know, do not competes and non-solicits, and maybe battling over intellectual property. One of the best resolutions to those lawsuits is, we'll buy your company. Let's just pull ourselves together and eliminate all the problems. And once you get into the weeds, into the nitty-gritty of the deal, what is the structure of the deal? You may have heard of asset deals, where you're just buying the assets of a company, or a stock deal, where you're just buying the stock of a company. These structures are 99% tax-driven. It's what's the most favorable structure. It's usually finding the structure that's most favorable to the buyer, because the buyer is the one coming to the table with the money, and they want something that's very favorable to them. It can also be favorable to the seller, depending how you structure it. But there are lots of different combinations. You know, stock is pretty much what it is. You're buying the stock of a company. But in asset deals, there are lots of different structures. You could buy the valuable assets and leave behind the unwanted, toxic assets. You can move the assets into a new company and then buy that new company. It's called a drop-down, and there may be tax benefits there. Again, something that you need advisors to work with you on what's most favorable. In this industry, earnouts are a big thing. I talked about people earlier. So when you buy a company and they have valuable people, you don't want those people walking out the day after the deal closes. So if you're a buyer, you're going to do two things. You're going to say to the seller, number one, I want your key people to be under an employment contract. That's going to be one of the documents we sign at closing, that they'll work for us for a certain number of years. And number two, that $10 million purchase price, I'm only paying you $2 million at closing. I'm going to pay you the other $8 million over time, and it may be based on targets to incentivize the seller. I want to see that you're hitting certain targets. You told me you're going to grow 40% a year. Okay, you'll get the purchase price assuming you can hit those numbers. And that's a very common deal to have earnouts. So that actual number that you're being purchased for may not be the real number you hit. You can also negotiate a deal where sometimes you may exceed the purchase price. There are lots of different combinations you can come up with. And then another part of the deal is I talked about employment contracts, is restrictive covenants. For the same reason you don't want the key personnel walking out the door the day after the deal closes, you certainly don't want them walking out the door and competing with you. So it's very common to have these sellers, key people, agree to restrictive covenants, such as they will not solicit your employees or the clients for a period of time, maybe a year, 2 years. A lot of times those restrictive covenants may even say you'll stay out of the industry completely. I just don't want you here. So it's sort of one of two ways. Either I'm structuring a deal to keep the key employees working with me, or I'm structuring a deal to make the key employees leave, but make sure they stay on the bench. I don't want them getting in the way of this business going forward. It's actually public information. One of the deals that we had worked on, we helped a tiny little company years ago sell themselves to Google. And the guys had to sit on the bench for a while. And then they came back years later after that all expired, and they started Foursquare. But there was a period of time they had to stay out of the business. That's a typical part of any deal. Post-transaction. You know, a big part of the deal is obviously not just getting it done and signing the paper. Once you sign the paper, the fun's really just beginning. I mean, then it's really how do we pull these two companies together? You know, were there things that we didn't see in our due diligence process? One of the big initial things the day after a deal closes is PR and messaging. And it's to different people. How do we want to message out to the industry, to our employees, to our clients, to our vendors? It may be that the employees didn't know about the deal. And that's quite often the case. The employees didn't know this was coming down the pipe. And suddenly they may have read online in a newsletter, or they get an email and they come into work that morning that says, guess what? We got new owners. Things are changing, and you certainly want to manage expectations with those employees so they're not terrified, so they don't start downloading all the company files and running out the door. You want to keep them happy, make them think positively. There's, of course, messaging to clients, which is a very important thing, because you generally will not tell your clients in advance of the deal if the deal is confidential. And then you have to deal with vendors, because you may have overlapping vendors. You may both be using, the same back-end ad serving company, the same hosting company. And obviously they realize that one of them is going to lose a customer, and you want to figure out how to message that. Of course, economies of scale are one of the best benefits for going through a transaction. We can do so much more together with fewer people. And that's always the big concern. When a deal goes down, the lower level or mid-level employees right away are going to think in their heads, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I better get my resume together. And you certainly want to calm them down if you want to keep them. Or if they really are going to be going out the door, you want to have a smooth transition. You don't want them burning down the house as they go out the door because they're angry. You want to help them and have good relationships with them. So some of the challenges are, of course, staffing issues and putting two entities together. And sometimes deals fail because of just corporate culture. It's very different. And you think about Wall Street when everything was on fire back in 2008. One of the big problems when Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch is that you had a radically different corporate culture. Bank of America, headquartered in Charlotte, was used to being a commercial bank running a lean machine, whereas Merrill Lynch, I actually used to work at Merrill Lynch years ago, had opulent offices with the executive suite had a barber shop and the gym and everything, so that they could really go out and enjoy themselves. There was a big uproar of the CEO of Merrill Lynch. I can't remember the number. He redecorated his office right before the sale. It was something like $200,000 to redecorate the office. It's a very different culture, and that can be a challenge when you pull two entities together and you got to define what is our culture going to be going forward. All right, protecting and exploiting intellectual property. Like I said, an exit strategy is not always I'm selling the company. It may be that, I'm going to do something else. I've built some technology internally, and now I'm ready to go out there and exploit it and make some money. Let me take you to Law School 101 for about 3 minutes here. Intellectual property. People get these terms wrong all the time. And if you're going to be talking to people who might be buying your company or investing in your company, you don't want to use these terms incorrectly because you may set the wrong expectations about what you own. So a patent, what is a patent? A patent is the exclusive right to a certain process. Utility patents is what we generally think of with business methods or some technical process. You filed an application with the federal government, you get a patent, you have the exclusive right. A copyright is an original work of authorship. If I go up to my hotel room today and I write down the Great American Novel on the little Caesar's notepads, I have a copyright protection in that work. What's interesting about copyright is you don't have to file anything to get protection. So if your company writes a fantastic piece of software, the actual lines of code are protectable by copyright. And the minute you create that software, whether or not you register, there's protection in that. Now there are great benefits to registering, which I can tell you later. Patent can protect the process that software can carry out. So you developed a software product that has some fantastic function that nobody else has. You can protect that via patent, but you must register. Copyright the lines of code, you get it automatically. A good analogy I can give you, Microsoft Word, it is a software program that helps you create documents. There may be a patent on certain processes, but you can go and sit and write your own software code and write your own product that will do a similar function. Trademark. Trademark is one that people usually get right. It's a name, a word, a symbol. It's a nice swoosh logo. That's a trademark. Again, there's great benefits to registering trademarks, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then, if you've heard me say registration with the first 3 columns there, then there's trade secrets. This is something you don't register. This is the secret formula to Coke. It's not registered anywhere. They protect it as a trade secret by not telling anybody what it is. The good thing about that is you can protect a trade secret forever. If nobody ever finds out what it is, you can keep it forever. Patents will expire. Copyrights even have a limitation on term. But a trade secret, you can protect it forever by having people sign NDAs and limiting who gets access to it. So what are the reasons for registering? Well, for patent, it's amazing, and you probably read about lots of patent lawsuits all over the place. It's because when you get a registered patent, you have exclusivity on a process. Period. That's it. No one else can do that process without infringing your patent. It doesn't make a difference if they thought about it independently, and it usually is not a difference if they were doing it previously. It depends on the dates of filing the patent. And it doesn't matter that it's become a common practice in the industry. It doesn't matter that one-click purchasing has become a common practice in the industry. If you get the patent, you're really in the driver's seat for leveraging people for money. Copyright, the great reason for registering, is you get what's called statutory damages. You all remember when the recording industry was going out and suing teenagers for millions of dollars for downloading songs on cassette. The reason is not because the songs were valued at 99 cents each as a download, because if you register a copyright, the law sets a dollar amount that you can get for infringement. And it sets the amount in the law from $750 up to $30,000, up to $150,000 if it's willful. So somebody intentionally copies a piece of music they didn't have the right to copy, you can get $150,000 for it. That's why the recording industry was suing everyone with these big numbers to scare them. Trademark, the great thing is that it sort of shifts the burden. If you register a trademark, it's the federal government saying you've got the exclusive right to use that trademark for those goods or services as long as there's no confusion. And it sort of shifts the burden of proof to the other side to prove that they have a right to use it. Last thing on IP, symbols. Patent pending means you filed an application. Patent number means you've got a registered patent. C in a circle is copyright. You don't need to register to put a C in a circle on your copyrights. You can put it on anything the minute you create it. All you're really doing is putting the world on notice that I claim copyright interest in this work. You may not have it in reality, but it's sort of just a notice thing. Trademark, TM or R in a circle is a big difference. TM means I claim trademark rights in this slogan. If I come up with a great slogan today and I start putting it in all my presentations, I can put a TM on it right now. But until I get a federally registered trademark, I can't put the R in the circle. So why do we do this as part of an exit strategy? Why are we talking about IP? Well, of course, there's the obvious thing, the internal reason. You may be enhancing your products and services internally. But you may think, I've got such a valuable piece of technology, I don't really need to sell the company. I'm just going to license this technology out all over the place. And that's going to be my exit strategy, licensing fees. That's a great exit strategy. So you may develop something internally, get it sound, protect it by all your registrations, and then start licensing it out and just have the money roll in on a regular basis. These days, you've probably heard a lot about a lot of patent lawsuits. It's amazing between Apple and Google and Motorola and Nokia, and everybody's suing each other over patents. And it's a bit of an offensive and defensive strategy. Having a good IP portfolio can be defensive. If people come after me, I'm going to show them I have the right to use things. Or it can be offensive. Say, look, I've got some great patents, and I'm going to go out and make some money by scaring people and sending them nasty letters that you're infringing my patent. So you've got two options. Stop doing what you're doing or pay up. And that can be a very, very valuable exit strategy. There are actually companies out there that will buy up your patents. And they buy up your patents for one reason and one reason only. They're going to go out and sue people. They're not going to buy your patent to build a product. They're not going to buy the patent because it augments their business. They're going to buy it because they think they can go out and sue people because there are folks out there in the industry infringing this patent. It's a very, very big industry. All right, employees. Can't emphasize enough how important it is with employees. And compensating your current employees during the operation of your company and certainly when there's a sale. Big thing is stock. Everybody's always like, I want stock. I want ownership in this company. I'm sure if you're senior management of a company, you've had lower level employees coming saying, I want stock. I'm really worth something. This is emotional attachment to stock, where a lot of times it may have no value. If you're a privately held company, the stock may have no value in the open market. You may have restrictions on it. So what's really the point? And issuing real equity to people, there's a cost. There's time and effort to put the proper plans in place, to have the proper documentation in place, to engage your legal counsel. And once you give someone real stock, they actually have real rights under the law. They will have the right to look at certain books and records. Depending on the way the deal is structured, they may have voting rights. So there's a lot that comes along with it. A lot of times when I'm talking with a small company, I'll say, you can accomplish everything you want without giving the employees actual stock. And we call that phantom stock. Basically what we're doing is, we're going to sign a contract with the employee. And it may say to the employee that if the company is sold, you're going to get X percent. If we go through some big transaction, you're going to have the following rights. But it's just a contract. We're not actually going to issue stock. There's no value to you, employee, for having stock you can't do anything with. And there's a big cost to me as the company to go through this whole process. I'd rather just give you what I call phantom equity. It'll make you happy that if we sell the company for $10 million, you're going to get a cut. But we don't have to go through all the hassle of having real stock. It's a great way to take care of things. Another simple way is to say to the employee, say, look, you don't really want stock. What you want is you want bonuses. You want money. Let's put in some goals. Let's put in some targets. That if you reach certain sales figures, we'll give you a certain bonus. Now you want to be very careful about whether a bonus is discretionary or it's guaranteed that they're going to get it. Because that comes up in case you fire an employee. They're going to come back and say, hey, that bonus plan you gave me, that was not discretionary, that was absolute, which means it's my salary, I earned it. You have to pay it to me even though you fired me. So that's a big issue, the way you structure bonuses. And then employment agreements. As I talked about with senior management, if there's a deal, you want to keep people involved, keep people incentivized. You may want to do that with certain managers in your organization. You may say, you know, you've become important enough to me that I need to have an employment agreement with you to make sure you're going to be around for a certain period of time. And again, restrictive covenants. I want to make sure you're not going to go to my competitor next door. I'll give you all these great bonuses. I'll even give you this great phantom equity. But I want commitments from you that you're not going to go and compete with me one day later. Okay, vendor-client contracts. This is a big thing that can come up and bite you when you're going through a transaction. You know, a lot of times when you're a small company, you get so excited when you get a new client. It's like, yes, I got the client I've been waiting for all along. And it may be a big Fortune 500 company. And they send you their standard 70-page contract. And you flip to page 70, you sign it, you fax it back, and you're like, awesome, I got the big client. You know, you really need to read these things and see what's in there. Because a lot of contracts will have some terms that can be very detrimental going forward as you operate the business and if you try to do a transaction. Term and cancellation. Depending upon the nature of the relationship, you may or may not want a very long term. And you certainly don't want your clients being able to cancel at any time without any notice. Because you may build up the client services team to service a key client. What if they have the right to terminate the contract on 5 days' notice? And you had to build up a big team. You know, there could be a real cost with that. MFN stands for Most Favored Nations. You may see this in a lot of deals where the client says, I want to guarantee that the fees you're charging me are the best fees you ever charge anybody of any of your clients. And you really want to try and resist that because, you know, there's only one best. There's only one best set of fees. And if you've got all these MFN provisions, you've got to bring everybody down to your lowest fees. And sometimes, you know, it's then almost a race to the bottom. And sometimes there may be parts of the deal that, you know, look, I'm willing to give X company lower pricing because they're giving me a huge volume. That's why I give them lower pricing. You know, Y company, I don't want to give you that great pricing because it's just not as worth as much to me. Or I may be willing to give 50% off, 75% off, 90% off to this client because there's intangible value. They can introduce me to other people. I can put their logo on my website. It makes me look great. So the pricing may not always be so, you know, comparing apples to apples. So you want to try and resist that. Now we're talking about deals and transfers and change of control. The assignment section is huge. There's two things, an assignment and a change of control. An assignment means I'm going to take this contract and transfer it from my company to a completely different company. A lot of contracts will say you can't do that, or you can't do that without permission. Sometimes they'll take that a little step further and have a change of control provision. It'll say, no, I'm not just worried about you taking the contract and moving it to a different company, like a buyer. I'm worried about if new owners come in and take control of your company. And that's a change of control provision. Bottom line is, you certainly want to resist change of control. That really restricts what you can do. And even with assignment, you don't want to make it too burdensome. I think the way to kind of split the baby here is to say, I can assign the contract in case I go through a merger or a sale, But if you don't like the new S&E, the new company that took me over, then you can terminate the contract. How about that? And that would usually make a client happy. Same type of restrictive covenants we talk about with employees can pop up in client contracts. The client may say, oh, you're the affiliate agency for Pepsi? All right, you can't work for Coke. All right, that might seem obvious. They may say, you can't work for any other beverage company. That can be scary, and a lot of times you see those provisions. Then you go through your transaction, some buyers will come along and they're very excited and they say, whoa, wait a minute. I just see that your biggest client here is Pepsi. Our biggest client is another, drink manufacturer. We can't work for them if we buy you. So, deal's off. Sorry, we just can't do this. So that type of thing can come back and hurt you, restrictive covenants. Then the IP. You want to make sure that in your contracts between you and your clients, what you own and what the client owns makes sense. I put data up there because I was once involved in a deal with a representative seller where they had this fantastic data, unbelievably great consumer data. And they were telling the buyer, man, with your products and services, buyer, when you buy us, this data is going to be gold for you because you'll be able to do all this fantastic targeting. You'll be able to do so many great things with it. Well, as the due diligence process went on, they looked into the client contracts. Turns out you weren't allowed to use the data for those reasons. You were allowed to use the data for internal analysis only, but you couldn't use it for advertising targeting. Killed the entire deal. So you want to think about those things. And also, sometimes you might see a provision triggered on sale, such as if you sell your company, you're going to give me access to your proprietary technology for free. Because I don't want to worry about losing access to your technology. You want to stay away from those types of things. All right, vendor contracts. A lot of the same type of issues we talked about with the client contracts, just the other side of the table. With a vendor, you really don't want a long-term contract because if you get bought, you may need to get rid of those vendors. You don't want a buyer to come along and say, wait a minute, you've got to pay this hosting company a monthly minimum for the next 5 years. But we don't need that. We've got a hosting company already. So that's coming out of the purchase price. That's a waste now that we got to pay this money. Again, restrictive covenants. You don't want the vendor sometimes to keep you out of certain businesses. Same thing with assignment or change of control. Surprisingly, in most deals, real estate's one of the worst things. Landlords can be a real pain in the butt. Landlords don't like when companies are bought and sold and whatnot, because they want to know who's paying the bills. So landlords can be really difficult when you have a deal. All right, internal controls. What do you do internally to keep the organization sound so you don't have that problem at the 11th hour when you're trying to go through a deal? Well, a big one obviously is confidentiality. You want to make sure that folks in your organization that are involved in a potential deal understand to keep it quiet. Because if they're out there talking about it, they can destroy the deal. And leaks can be a very bad thing. Time drain. I will say to an owner of a business, there will be nothing more challenging in your life than trying to operate a company on a day-to-day basis while at the same time trying to sell it. It is really difficult. It takes a lot of time. So obviously, if you want to go through a transaction, you've got to understand the commitment and what's going to be involved. A big thing in internal controls, make sure your employees, this is a little bit on a tangent, are classified properly. Taxing authorities in states are going after companies all the time because if you classify someone as a contractor, but in reality they're an employee, they show up to the office every day, they work 40 hours a week, you tell them what to do, but you've decided to call them a contractor, what do you think happens when you fire that person? They go to the employment office and they file an unemployment claim because they want benefits. And then the taxing authority comes to you and says, you never paid employment taxes for that person. And you'll say, well, they were a contractor. I don't have to pay unemployment taxes for them. And then you end up with an investigation from the taxing authorities. Real big trend with states that have budgets that are hurting, they're going after this a ton these days. Controlling public statements. All right, this is a fun story. Actually, those of you who have ever seen other talks of mine, this is probably the driest talk I've ever given in my entire life. Usually my talks have a lot of fun war stories. So here's a good war story. You certainly want to control what your employees say publicly and what they do, because it can really kill your business. If those of you who have followed Chrysler's new advertising campaign, their new advertising campaign says, imported from Detroit. They're embracing the idea that they're from Detroit instead of, as the economy was tanking, running away from the idea of Detroit. So they hired a social media company to promote that theme, imported from Detroit. It was a company in Detroit called New Media Strategies. And one day, one of the employees from New Media Strategies was driving to work, had a bad commute, and got to the office all frustrated and upset. And what do people do these days when they have anything they want to gripe about? Of course, they go online and tweet about it. So the person got to the office and tweeted, "I find it ironic that Detroit is known as the Motor City, yet no one here knows how to freaking drive." What do you think is really, really bad about that tweet? Looking at that. Chrysler Autos. The employee posted that from the Chrysler Autos official Twitter feed with hundreds of thousands of followers. Yeah, big oops. That's a big Rick Perry moment. Oops. Well, of course, you can realize that they're freaking out. New Media Strategy calls up Chrysler and says, "Don't worry, we fired the employee." Chrysler says, "Great, and you guys are fired as well." So that can certainly kill a deal if you have employees doing things or saying things online. To make up another example, what if you were thinking about a transaction with a potential buyer and your employees go online and bash the buyer and say something really bad about them? That can kill a deal as well. So you've got to control the employees. This was a fascinating one, which I read in the New York Times last month, and it's an issue that I've dealt with clients, and now there's a lawsuit. This will be really interesting. Who owns a Twitter account? I may not have all the facts exact, but this was a case where an employee was told, set up a Twitter account and start tweeting about, great issues in the industry. And maybe the employee's name was Bob, and so it was, at Bob something. And he started tweeting and got lots and lots of followers and became very popular. Well, then Bob is leaving the company. The company looks at that and says, "Wow, that Twitter account has 400,000 followers. That's a customer list. That's an asset. Bob, you can't take that with you. That's ours. You're not taking that with you, Bob, when you leave." And there's now a lawsuit going on over that very issue, that the followers on Twitter are a customer list, it's an asset, and it belongs to the company. I think it's a fascinating issue. It'll be interesting how this all turns out. But how do you deal with this? Make sure you have an understanding with the employee in advance and agreements and terms about who owns what. All right, this may be my favorite one. Again, Twitter leaks. Boy, Twitter can be a real nightmare. The number of calls I get from clients with Twitter problems, it can be a real challenge. Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent, had tweeted one day on Twitter. He was talking about a stock. He said, "HNHI is the stock symbol for TVG. They're launching 15 different products. They are no joke. Get it now." Well, there's only one thing that Mr. Jackson didn't disclose when he made this tweet. That he owns 7.5 million shares and had warrants for 22.5 million more. Almost sounds like a pump and dump scheme. The stock goes up. Believe it or not, 50 Cent has influence over the financial markets. And the stock actually went up when he tweeted this. Well, guarantee he got a call from HNHI, who was probably freaking out. He got a call from his lawyers, got a call from his financial advisors, PR people saying, "You've got a really big problem here. We need to fix this." So he posted a follow-up tweet, which I absolutely loved. "My own HNHI stock thoughts on it are my opinion. Talk to a financial advisor. HNHI is the right investment for me. It may not be the right investment for you." Great, great follow-up. All right, privacy. Last thing I'll talk about before I open up to some questions. And privacy is actually a very big part of my practice, and I put it in here about exit strategies because I can see more and more deals being scuttled over privacy concerns. Maybe you're about to go through a deal and suddenly you get an FTC letter investigating you. That will certainly kill a transaction. So you want to make sure you stay away from privacy problems. You can't read at the bottom, it says, "What's to prevent some total stranger anywhere in the world from paying my bills?" That's like me showing my mom how to use a computer. The point is that consumers have unrealistic expectations about privacy sometimes, but you need to meet those expectations, otherwise they complain and they get very vocal. In the U.S., we have we don't have one overarching privacy law in the U.S., which makes it sometimes challenging to make sure that you are in compliance with all laws. The biggest thing is the Fair Information Practice Principles from the FTC. Notice, choice, access, security, and enforcement. And it's somewhat intuitive. If you're dealing with personal data from consumers, which of course in this industry we deal with a ton, give them notice. Let them know what you're going to collect. Number 2, choice. Give them a choice whether or not to keep the information. Access, give them the ability to contact you, delete the information, correct the information. Security, keep it secure. Nothing can be worse than having a security breach, on the eve of closing the deal. That's really going to kill any deal. And enforcement, say what you do and do what you say. If you say online, we will never sell your information to a third party, then you can't sell to a third party. And if you're going through a transaction which involves a sale of your customer list to a third party, that could be a big problem. Those sort of disclosures about sales to third parties and transferring data are a big issue. Most privacy policies will have some sort of language about, we're going to keep your information secure and not share it with third parties. However, if our company is sold, this is an asset. It's going to go along with the sale. That's very important. What's wrong? FTC, it's been so incredibly active recently. I put up some of the big ones there. They settled with Google over the failed Google Buzz program where they were opting in people to the new social network without their consent. Twitter had just a typical security hack. Didn't really affect them at all because they're Twitter. They're growing, they're big, and they're doing fine. Facebook had a big settlement 2 months ago about their policies, and this is going to change their practices going forward. They're going to have to make more disclosures to consumers about how they use data and when they want to change practices. Chitika was one about behavioral advertising, where they said in their policy that if you opt out, the opt-out cookie will be good for 10 years. Turns out the opt-out cookie was good for 10 days. That was a big, big mistake. Again, these types of mistakes happen as you're considering a transaction. It will scare the seller off in a heartbeat. They don't want to buy a problem. Disney bought a problem recently. There was a company, I'm probably getting the name wrong, but there was a company that settled with the FTC within the past year. They were bought by Disney, and then then the investigation came to light. Disney couldn't get out of it. They were obviously very upset. And I can guarantee you behind the scenes, Disney probably went back to the sellers and saying, we want some of that purchase price back for all the hassles we have to go through now because of these problems. And that can be something that's scary that happens too. Again, little tangent. If you sell your company, there's going to be representations and warranties in the deal that we're in compliance with all laws. And those reps live for a certain amount of time after a deal. So you sell the company, the FTC investigation happens 2 months later, the buyer may come back and say, this is on your dime. You owe me money for this because you weren't in compliance with all laws. You didn't tell me the truth. The FTC has a ton of initiatives going on in the privacy area. COPPA stands for the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. If you collect information from children, you really got to make sure you're compliant with all laws. Security breaches, and they're very big into saying one thing and doing something else with your security promises. And of course, the customary investigations of the FTC and the advertising industry, which have been going on for decades, is about being deceptive. Do not be deceptive. Do not tell people that, click here and you're going to win $1 million when that's not really the case. Last war story, and I can open up for questions. With privacy, big thing I said, say what you do what you say, and it's very important that your whole organization understand how you treat consumer data and how you treat privacy. In this case, Mr. Greer versus 1-800-Flowers. Mr. Greer decided to purchase some flowers one day for his girlfriend. Very typical, normal thing. So he called up 1-800-Flowers and said, I want to buy some flowers. Mr. Greer was actually concerned about privacy. So he said to 1-800-Flowers, how are you going to treat my information, my personal information? The customer service rep said, don't worry, Mr. Greer. We have a privacy policy on our website. You can go read it. It says we don't share your personal information with anybody. So you can be comfortable, we keep it secure. Mr. Greer says, great, I will buy the flowers for my girlfriend. The only person Mr. Greer didn't clear this with was Mrs. Greer, his wife, when he was buying flowers for the girlfriend. So at that time, 1-800-Flowers had a process where if you made a certain purchase, they would send you a thank you card. So thank you for making the purchase. So where do you think 1-800-Flowers sends the thank you card? They've got one address, the home billing address on the credit card. So they send the thank you card to the home billing address. And Murphy's Law, who's getting the mail that day? Mrs. Greer. So Mrs. Greer, she's kind of inquisitive. She opens it up, she reads it, she thinks, we didn't order any flowers. So she calls 1-800-Flowers and says, well, what is this? We didn't order any flowers. And the customer service rep proceeds to tell her everything. That Mr. Greer ordered the flowers, who they were delivered to, even the contents of the little card that have been inside the flowers. Yeah, that's where internal controls die. It was not that the company had a bad privacy policy. They had a great one. The issue was the customer service reps being trained and understanding how that policy works. So just a little lesson to make sure that your employees understand the way your policies work in your company. And this goes through everything, about keeping things confidential, about how we're going to treat customers and clients, how we're going to talk about competitors. You don't want employees going online and causing a problem for you. Okay, and with that, I can open it up to some questions. I'll also tell you that I think the summit puts slides online, but if you want like a copy of the slides, I can send them to you. Give me your card. We also have newsletters we put out from the law firm, which can sometimes be of value. So if you want to be put on that list, you can also give me your card as well. Questions? Yes?
One question, as far as evaluating a company, especially in this space, that doesn't necessarily have revenue, but the leads tie in directly to somebody who can really do well with them. Where we just don't have that product to sell, we don't want to build that relationship yet with them to try and use their product as an affiliate. We'd rather just sell them this good amount of leads. Can that be valued properly, or how would that work?
Sure. And I know that there's a mic for questions, but if it's okay if you don't go up there, I'll just kind of repeat the question. The question was sort of how to value the company. We don't necessarily have these huge revenues, so you may have valuable leads and other things such as that. I mean, two things. Number one, any asset has value. Again, it could be you've got the most brilliant technical mind sitting in your office, and that's the asset. Leads can be an asset. Data can be an asset. And these are things that, you have to try to figure out how do we put a value on this. When it comes to data and leads, you might think of the cost per acquisition for someone else to generate those sort of leads and that sort of data. You do want to be careful in the way you talk about numbers. I've seen companies, when they come to an investor and they say, oh, we've got $10 million in sales that we're responsible for. And they may not be, and they say, all right, what does that mean responsible for? Well, we're driving leads for these other companies that sell products. It's like, well, wait a minute, how much money do you guys actually get? You may only be getting, $100,000. So you certainly want to be, clear with potential investors about what's really coming in. And, it may be a fantastic thing to say, look, we are driving $10 million in sales. Our own revenues are this number. Let's make sure we get those numbers correct. Other questions? Yes? Sure.
So there are a lot of different models in this industry. I assume this is on.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different models in this industry, and typically we'll see different types of models generate different types of of multiples of valuations. In your experience, what are the models that drive the highest multiples? A good friend of mine has a company that isn't in this industry at all, and he's trying to make a decision right now of the direction he wants to go. One would kind of make him a software as a service provider, and one would be more like a processor of information and just get a fee for processing. Valuations of that's like a 2 times, and this is like a 10 times, and it made a lot of different kind of conversations.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and you pretty much hit on the answer. Valuations for a technology company are much higher. It could be 10 times earnings, it could be 20 times earnings, it could be something ridiculous. Whereas if you're a pure services company that's based on human capital, the numbers may be lower. It may be 4 to 6 times earnings or something like that. And it's just an investor looking at the reality, saying, look, if I come in and buy this company that relies on human capital and manpower, yeah, we can optimize it, we can grow it. There's a way that we can really increase things here, but there is a certain cap because I need people to do this. Whereas if I'm buying a pure technology play, sky's the limit. If I turn this into the next AdWords model, it's going to be fantastic. It could be 200 times earnings. So the simple answer is generally, the technology plays will have higher multiples. Yes.
Hi, Brian Vance with Rankable.net, and we are fairly new to software development, but we've built some really neat SEO automation software, and we're just beginning to market it. But for whatever reason, our first few customers have been overseas, and in talking about copyright and patents and protections, when you sell intellectual property to an offshore person outside of the jurisdictional reach of U.S. copyright laws, what controls can we put in place to protect our property?
Sure, that's a great question, one that I deal with a lot of clients, because there are certain jurisdictions where people are going to respect your intellectual property better than other jurisdictions. You do a contract with a company in Canada or in the EU, they're going to do a much better job of protecting your intellectual property. Frankly, the honest truth is you do a deal with a company in China, they'll sign whatever you want, and they'll have their buddies come in and knock it off. And, I'm dealing with one biotech company right now who's looking at, they said, they want something manufactured in Europe. The cost is about, X, but they know the company will respect the intellectual property. They can get it manufactured in China for a fifth of the cost or even lower, but they know their IP will then be out in the wild because they're not going to respect it. And so, that's one of the challenges. It's really looking at the particular jurisdiction and do they have a mature legal system that respects intellectual property rights, or is it China or Russia where once you give them your intellectual property or they build something for you, they're going to have their buddies come in and sit down right next to them, learn all the secret sauce and go build it themselves. It's a real challenge because of the cost. Because you can get unbelievably talented developers in certain countries, but you get concerned about the intellectual property protection. Any other questions? Yeah.
How much information, as far as when you're entering this process and you're not sure, how far along you want to go yet or what's going to happen, and considering they are rivals in some sense, how much information is too much information? As far as,
Good question. The question was, how much information is too much information when you're talking to someone about a deal, especially if they're a competitor? That's a very big issue, and we see that very frequently. Firstly, you wouldn't engage in conversations with your competitor about a potential deal unless you're serious about a potential deal. It wouldn't be a fishing expedition. You would sign a confidentiality agreement, which will certainly limit the information that's going to be disclosed. And then I have seen in that due diligence process when you're working with the competitor, not to totally open the books. You may redact certain information on contracts. You may say, look, I'm not going to give you the names of my top 10 clients, I'm just going to give you numbers, and wait until you get further down the road, until you're really comfortable the deal's going to happen, to fully disclose everything. But dealing with a competitor in a transaction is very common, and there are ways to deal with it. I see that we're out of time, but I want to thank everyone very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it.